Mike, we've reached the point now where the Coast Guard is telling its contractors to look into babysitting jobs, to look into dog walking, and to have garage sales. That was a posting on one of their websites because of the government shutdown.
All admirable occupations, Willie. I don't know how much they pay by the hour, but that's what we've been reduced to. That, in addition to the other outstanding question that was just raised by the clip we showed, who invited him to give a commencement speech?
I just asked the same. That was in 2004, some time ago. Well, President Trump is scheduled to visit a Border Patrol station in McAllen, Texas today, despite his reported misgivings about that trip. The New York Times reports that he told a group of television anchors, quote, "It's not going to change a damn thing, but I'm still going." In his Oval Office address on Tuesday night, the president told the nation he is ready to negotiate. But yesterday, he abruptly ended a White House meeting.
This situation could be solved in a 45-minute meeting. I have invited congressional leadership to the White House tomorrow to get this done.
We saw a temper tantrum because he couldn't get his way, and he just walked out of the meeting.
The president walked into the room, passed out candy.
He even brought a little candy for everybody.
I asked him to open up the government, that tomorrow so many people will have trouble paying their mortgages, paying their bills, dealing with situations when they don't get paid.
I saw Schumer continue to raise his voice.
I said, just why won't you do that? We'll continue to discuss. We're willing to discuss anything.
The Democratic leaders are unwilling to even negotiate.
And he said, if I open up the government, you won't do what I want.
The president then turned to the speaker and politely asked her, okay, Nancy, if we open the government up in 30 days, could we have border security? She raised her hand and said, no, not at all.
He asked Speaker Pelosi, will you agree to my wall? She said no.
The president calmly said, I guess you're still not wanting to deal with the problem.
And then a few minutes later, he sort of slammed the table.
I don't recall him ever raising his voice or slamming his hand.
And when Leader Pelosi said she didn't agree with the wall, he just walked out and said, we have nothing to discuss. So he said it was a waste of his time.
And the president admitted that he used those words, tweeting, quote, just left a meeting with Chuck and Nancy, a total waste of time. I asked what's going to happen in 30 days if I quickly open things up. Are you going to approve border security, which includes a wall or a steel barrier? Nancy said no. I said, bye-bye. Nothing else works. So that's the president tweeting as he walked out of that meeting, Caddy. We went through some of the litany of things that people are suffering from. They're going to miss their first paycheck now. If we make it to Saturday, this will be the longest shutdown of the federal government in American history. And boy, as you watch the Congress people come out of that meeting yesterday, you watch people talk on television last night from the House and the Senate, it doesn't look like there's an end in sight here.
No, look, Democrats are trying to make this about the shutdown and the harm this is causing federal workers, and Donald Trump is trying to make this about the wall, and the two sides are on parallel tracks, and that's kind of a metaphor for where they are, because there's no sign that either is coming together. I spoke to a federal worker out in California just yesterday who said she has a mortgage payment coming due of $3,000. She has childcare payments coming due. She has a car loan payment coming due this weekend. She has graduate school payments coming due this weekend. She's in a middle-class family. She admits that. With her husband works too. They have a 3-year-old kid. She cannot make those payments this week, and she's not allowed under federal law to get another job. So you can say go out and find another job to fill the stopgap. She's actually not allowed to do that. She would actually then potentially face the risk of getting fired from her actual job if she did go out and take one of those other jobs. So they are in a real bind, and I don't see any sign from yesterday that Democrats are prepared to shift, that the president is prepared to shift, and we're looking at the possibility of declaring a national emergency, which may be a way out for him. Maybe that's his off-ramp from all of this. You declare an emergency, you appropriate the funds from elsewhere, it gets challenged in the courts, but by then maybe he's out of this.
Yeah, 24 hours ago we were talking about the possibility of him declaring a national emergency. It looks even more real this morning. Here's what the president said yesterday before his meeting with congressional leaders collapsed.
I may go that route. I have the absolute right to do national emergency if I want. My threshold will be if I can't make a deal with people that are unreasonable.
And now White House officials are telling the Wall Street Journal the breakdown in negotiations is making that scenario even more likely. The path forward these officials are discussing is to have the president declare the national emergency to fund the border wall, while at the same time agreeing to sign a spending bill to reopen the government. While the declaration likely would face an immediate legal challenge, President Trump would be able to tell supporters he did everything he could to build the wall. Quote, "It will come to this," one White House official said. The question is when. Several Republican senators, though, I underline that, voicing skepticism about that idea.
I can tell you that for people on my side of the aisle, one of the concerns we should have is if today the national emergency is border security and it entitles them to go out and do something, we all support that. Tomorrow, the national security emergency might be, climate change. So let's seize fossil fuel plants or something.
To repurpose $5 billion, close to $6 billion, out of the Defense Department that is needed for defense needs and use it to build a border wall without congressional authorization is not what I think is intended by the National Emergency Act.
Michael Steele, do you think this is where we end up? Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have shown no willingness to budge, nor do Democrats believe they should budge. Why should they? To give Donald Trump what they believe is a vanity project, a promise he made on the campaign trail. And if they don't, are we going to a national emergency here?
Well, they won't. I don't see any wiggle room for Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer to then go back into the White House and say, all right, here's $2 billion, $3 billion for the wall. That's just off the table. We are where we are because this is actually where Trump wants to be. This idea of the national emergency, while he's sort of tinker-toyed around with it and saying, well, I may, but I have the authority to do it. I might, but I absolutely can do it. He absolutely wants to do it because it is the only off-ramp that he has. He'll throw it into the courts, let them work it out. He'll go to the base and say, I did everything. I got the money for the wall. We're going to start building the wall. And then 6 months, 8 months, whatever time frame that's left over to figure all of that out, he will have moved on. And there will be other emergencies that will be manufactured and put on the table for the House, the Senate, and the nation to deal with. But we are here because this is where the president wants us to be right now.
He will absolutely declare an emergency. He's a reality show producer, and he's producing this. I couldn't figure out why he went on the air the other night because I knew he wasn't going to do it then. He's like, now he gets to say, well, I went on the air, I asked the people, I went down to the border, I had these meetings. And it's a judo move. He's going to say, I opened the government, which basically plays to every autocratic instinct he has. He loves a pardon. He loves anything he can do with a pure executive order. And now he says, I opened it, and the Democrats are going to want to sue to close it again. The Democrats are going to take it to the courts, so I can't protect the country, and I can't keep the government open. Now, the Democratic argument has to become more nuanced. They say, no, we are going to court because he does not have the right to take $5 billion without Congress. That's a more nuanced argument. It's a very, very different argument. He will absolutely, it's unequivocal. There's no other way out. And I want to, it's interesting. There was also, it's a sidebar for a second, but it's a little interesting, funny thing. The ratings the other night, Pelosi and Schumer outrated Trump afterwards. The ratings came out. This is fascinating. Now, Schumer and Pelosi are not exactly Brad and Angelina. I love them. They're both great leaders. They're not ratings gangbusters. What does that tell you? It tells you maybe there's a wear-out factor now with Trump. His first, it's a little funny sidebar, he didn't rate as well. Is the American public, is even 1% of his base, certainly I know the 8 or 9% that voted against him in the last election, getting worn out? I thought that was an interesting statistic.
Well, Heidi, clearly, as you cover Capitol Hill, Republicans on Capitol Hill are starting to get worn out. It's not just Marco Rubio and Susan Collins. We heard you had Pat Roberts, Republican from Kansas, not exactly a liberal squish, saying, this is getting old. We've got to figure out how to get these people paid and end this shutdown. The writing is on the wall that even Senate Republicans and some congressional Republicans are saying this doesn't make any sense. We want border security, but the way we're going about it here isn't working.
Question from the start about the wear-out factor among Republicans has been, when are they going to hear it from their constituents? When are they going to hear it from the polls? Right. Well, there have already been studies shown that a lot of the people who are being affected by this shutdown don't live in Washington, D.C. 79% of federal workers live outside Washington, D.C. Many of them are their constituents. And yes, they're hearing from them because people don't understand how broad the effects of this are until the government actually shuts down. And you have everything affected, from all of the border officials, the TSA officials, firefighters, down to just the most basic necessities, including food inspection, including now food stamps and nutrition. And so those senators, and I would look for more of them, just look at that list of 2020 senators, there's 6 of them who are going to be up. And that is where you're going to see the breaking point. McConnell, notably, was absolutely silent in that meeting.
You know,
one test might be whether they start calling their congressman, as the president asked them to do, demanding the wall, or whether they start calling their congressman asking for the government to be reopened, right? Then we'll have a barometer.
But the American people are so smart, so much smarter than their elected representatives. Why would they call them? They stand there as mutes, both in the House and the Senate, most of them. We show these clips every day. We talk about the wall every day. We had Marco Rubio on just a few moments ago saying something inane about the wall. But what's going on here, if you really think about it, the real danger here is, you mentioned the word autocracy. An autocracy is defined as one person who possesses singular power in any government. This man, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has single-handedly, over the past 2 years, taken aim at destroying some of the basic institutions of our republic. And he has succeeded thus far in damaging most of those institutions. And the question isn't about the wall. The question is about the country, the United States of America. And how much longer can we survive the autocratic tendencies of one man, Donald Trump, who is all about himself? This is not about the wall. This is not about the money. This is a self-described, self-induced crisis that the president himself has created. He has talked about a national emergency, when the national emergency and the crisis, both of them combined, is all wrapped up in one individual, Donald J. Trump.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.